Okay, welcome back to the ChopHouse episode 6. I appreciate all you guys tuning in. And this week, as promised, we're going to deal with doubling up in 30-second notes in a 3-note phrase. So I'm going to get busy showing you this. And just to let you know, I know that we're starting at a very basic and fundamental level, and that's exactly where I want to start. There are great videos out there, guys playing groups of 5 and 9 and 7, and making like 13-note phrases and 17-note phrases and 21-note phrases, and they're tremendous and amazing. But in order to get to combinations, we need to stick with the simple patterns themselves. We will get into combinations, but again, I want to exhaust in the same way that I have the 3s. I want to exhaust 4-note phrasings, 5-note phrasing, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on and so forth. And when we get through that process and on to doing combinations, you will really, I think you should, have a fundamental, foundational understanding of these things and be able to pull them out of your arse anytime you want to. So that's what I'm hoping for you. And so I can't think about talking. Oh, we're going to also step some stuff in the hi-hat. That's something that I haven't shown yet, but we're going to step bass drum notes in the left foot, in the hi-hat foot. And we're going to do kind of a cool suspension of time with that, just sort of lifting the time, playing lighter, and then as juxtaposed with the sort of heavier elements around the drums, the toms and things like that. We're going to lift the time a little bit and create some pretty cool fills that way. So enough talk, let's get busy. Okay, so we're going to double up the hands first and then the feet, taking 1 note, doubling 1 note, and then doubling 2 notes, and then doubling all 3 notes. So I will take you through that, just the mechanics of that, so you can see how it's done, and then we'll get into playing time and looping it. In terms of looping it, it's very important to realize that this is a 3-note phrase in 16ths, of which there are 4 16ths in a beat. So this is actually going to take 3 bars to resolve itself, and that's very important to know when you're looping it, because you need to know when to change. Looping it, once again, I think is one of the best ways to get this down, because you have other things to think about than just the phrase itself. You have your transition points, which are how to start which hand when the resolve comes around. When the phrase resolves, you need to be able to switch to whatever hand you're doubling up next. So if you start on the first hand, when that 4th bar comes around, the end of the 3rd bar, you need to realize that it's going to be a right, and then you're doubling a left instead of doubling the right to begin with. And then the last time through, you're going to be doubling up back on the right on the last note. So all these things are very important. I'll take you through just the mechanics of it here in 16ths. 3, 4. Okay, so that's doubling up the first note, doubling up the second note in the 3-note phrase. And doubling up the last note in the 3-note phrase. Okay? Okay, so now we're going to loop these 3 hand positions, doubling hand positions, and of course it's going to take 3 bars to resolve each one of these. And then I will move on to the newest hand position, so starting out doubling the first note, then doubling the second note, and doubling the 3rd note, all at 90 beats a minute. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now I'm going to take the single notes that were involved in this last process I showed, and I'm going to play those singles on the toms, alternating between them, still going through the loop and still mindful of which hands need to be in what position when I start the new doubled note, okay? And something you should be mindful of as you play through these so that you can loop it effectively and really get the 3-note phrase down at 90 beats a minute. 2, 3, 4. So now I'm going to take the same singles that I applied to the toms and I'm going to move them up to the crash cymbals with bass drum and play it that way, all right? And once again, remain mindful of where you have to make the switches. You're going to actually now be playing 3 bass drums in a row in order to make the transition work. In 90 beats a minute, that's not too tough. 135 gets a little bit tougher. Here it is at 90. 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the whole process again, doubling up just on the snare drum, and then putting the singles on the toms, and then putting the singles on the cymbals at 135. And I'm doing this in time. I'm only going to do it at 2 tempo markings, 90 and 135. You can also just play these things slow to fast and try to get them as fast as you want or as slow as you want. As long as you can play them over the bar line and you can hear that phrase over the bar line, that's what I'm most concerned about. And putting them into a group context, that's why I'm playing them with a metronome, okay? So at 135, going through all 3 processes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, moving the singles to the toms at 135. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now moving from toms to cymbals, I'll play the same thing at 135. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, doubling up 2 notes now. We'll start with the first 2, then the last 2, and then the last and the first at 90 beats a minute. And just to let you know, as per the previous example, these work themselves out as rudimentary as well. So the last example really is a single drag. And the way doubling up 2 of these notes comes out is a 5-stroke roll. So if you want to look at them like in terms of rudimentary applications, you can look at them both ways. I kind of like this approach because it now starts to deal with phrasing, and you start to realize, oh, the 5-stroke roll can be a 3-note phrase. And if you're called upon to play a group of notes accenting every 3rd note, you could play a 5-stroke roll. So it's good to know that they have dual applications. Okay, 90 beats a minute. 1, 2, 3, 4. Moving on to the toms, I will now put the only single that is represented in this exercise onto the toms at 90 beats a minute. Once again, looping it. 2, 3, 4. All right, now single notes up to the cymbals at 90 beats a minute. 2, 3, 4. Okay, moving on up to 135. We will take this again back to the snare drum, doubling up 2 notes. First 2, last and first at 135. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, moving on to the toms, 135, putting the only accented single note of this configuration onto the toms. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, last but probably not least, I will move the single noted accent up to the cymbals, doubling up the snare drum, first 2, and the last and first at 135. 2, 3, 4. Okay, and lastly, I will double up all the notes, and of course this really just creates a long roll, but I'll do it at 90 just to show you. When we get into the feet, there are more applications for this, but in terms of the hands, it's just really a long roll. 2, 3, 4. Okay, moving on to the feet now. We will double up single notes, and then we will double up 1 note with the bass drum and 1 note with the hand, and then 1 note with the bass drum and 2 notes with the hands, doubling all the notes. Just to keep this straight, as per last week in episode 5, I was going to say lesson and I said lepisode. It almost sounds like some kind of animal, doesn't it? We are going to, you need to make sure that you are keeping a right, left, right, left, right, left integrity with these things. So if I play a double on the first note of the 3-note phrase, my first hand is going to be a left hand. Okay, so you're not going to play kick, kick, right, left. You're going to play kick, kick, left, right, kick, kick, right, left, keeping the integrity of the 3-note phrase. That doesn't mean that you always have to do this. This is just for practice purposes, and as we move on and we get into fill applications, I'll show you that you don't have to alternate the hands or keep the integrity of that, and I'll show you some cool ideas in terms of time playing on how to do that. All right, so here we go. Okay, so just for mechanics' sake, this is what it looks like played without the click, just doubling up the first note, and then I'll double up the second and the third separately. Okay, 2, 3, 4. Okay, working the mechanics of doubling up the second note, and if you notice, I will be playing a right hand first, and then foot, foot, and then left, right, and so on and so forth. 2, 3, 4. last note in the bass drum, just to show the mechanics. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so there's the mechanics out of the way. Now I will loop the mechanics of this, fusing them all together, doing 3-bar examples. And I understand, if you noticed, I did that I played 2-bar examples of the first 2 mechanics and then a 3-bar example of the last mechanic. Play 3 bars when you practice this, because this is where it resolves. Of course, I'll do that now in the loop at 90 beats a minute. 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now I'll loop 2 notes, and just so you know how this loop goes, it'll be a little different. So I'll loop the first 2, then I will loop the last and the first, starting with the bass drum, and then I will loop the last 2. Okay, just so you know how I have configured this loop. That's how I'm doing it. 2, 3, 4. And lastly, I will double all the notes. I will double the bass drum on the first note, and then on the middle note, and then on the last note, doubling all the notes in the hands at 90. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, coming back to the snare drum now at 135, we will go through the whole process again, putting in the bass drum, doubling it up on the first note, second note, and third note. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, doubling up 2 notes now. We will do the same thing at 135, doubling up the bass drum, first hand, and so on through the loop at 135. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and lastly, we will double up all the notes, putting the bass drum, doubling it on the first note, the second note, and then the last note at 135 in the loop as we've done in previous examples. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, quite a workout, and so it should be. I mean that in the best possible musical terms. These things are going to make you sweat a little bit to get them under your feet and out of your hands. And once you've done that, then you can apply these things in a musical context. I'm going to give some fill examples, the metronome at 110, and I'll play a halftime groove to begin with, and I'll just use the hands to give some simple examples there and move on to the feet. 1, 2. Okay, so now I'll move into the feet, giving some fill examples there. I'll keep the same tempo, but I'll play a regular time feel. All right, 110. 1, 2. Okay, so now, as I mentioned previously, I'm going to get into kind of that time suspension idea. Now, this incorporates using all of the doubles, so doubles in the bass drum and doubles in all the hands, and I'm also going to step notes in the hi-hat in this example because it gives a nice levity to the fill that you're doing or just the music itself. Okay, so I'm going to go back to a halftime feel at 90, and I'll give you an example of what that looks like and what it sounds like. 1, 2. Okay, so I'll move the metronome up to 110, and I'll do essentially the same thing again, playing a halftime feel, but this time I'm going to step more notes in the hi-hat just to give you an idea of what that can sound like. And any note you step in the bass drum, you can step in the hi-hat, and so you should. So I'll give you an idea of what that sounds like in a groove fill context. 1, 2. Okay, I want to talk about one more thing in terms of this approach that we're using. And we've dealt with the rates in terms of triplets and sixteenths. Another thing you can practice is going in and out of those two rates, playing, the same sort of maybe doubling up bass drum and one hand. So I'm going to give you an example of that. I'll do it at 110. And so this will be going in and out of triplet and 16th note rates. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. concludes this week's lesson, and in a sense it kind of concludes the three-note phrase, at least anything I'm willing to work on in terms of it right now. There are flam applications for three-note phrases, but I'm going to deal with that when we get to Swiss triplets, which won't be too far from now. Next week I want to start talking about groove grid. So we're going to take a permutative limb approach to ostinato-based rhythms. And if you don't know what that means, tune in next week and I'll explain it a little bit better. But I appreciate you guys. I appreciate anybody sticking with me through this. You notice I got a backdrop now. Maybe not the swankiest, but you know, we're moving along. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. Subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff, leave a comment, and I'll see you next week.